The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual chatter of 1,000 different species. Representatives from across known space gathered in their floating seats, discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes. At the center, podium, a human stood waiting. Hyun-Woo Kim adjusted his simple black suit and looked up at the massive chamber. He had been Earth's ambassador for 10 years, and in all that time, he felt like he was talking to a wall. Today would be different, though. Today would be the last time. Honored council members, Hyun-Woo began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation devices. I come before you one final time to address the growing restrictions placed upon human territories and trade routes. A low rumble of disinterest rippled through the chamber. The Vorthon representative, a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms, waved dismissively. Another human complaint. Do they ever stop arguing among themselves long enough to make sense? Hyun-Woo continued as if he hadn't heard. For 30 years, humanity has requested fair representation in council decisions that affect our worlds. We have asked for equal access to trade networks. We have sought partnership, not dominance. The Krath delegate, a massive creature covered in metallic scales, let out what passed for laughter among his species. Humans always want more than they deserve. Your people fight wars over scraps of land while we manage entire star systems. You have made your position clear, Hyun-Woo said quietly. We have heard your answer. He paused, looking around the chamber one last time. Therefore, humanity formally withdraws all requests for council consideration. We will trouble you no more. Without another word, he walked out of the chamber. Behind him, the aliens continued their discussions, already forgetting the human ambassador existed. 3 days later, something strange happened on Kepler Station, the largest human outpost in council space. Taemin Park, a cargo hauler who had been working the station for 15 years, was loading his ship with an unusual amount of supplies. Other workers noticed him taking food, medical equipment, and engineering tools far beyond what any normal cargo run would need. Where are you headed with all that? Asked Vex, a friendly Zilani dock worker who had known Taemin for years. Taemin smiled, but there was something different about his expression. Something final. Home, he said simply. But this is your home route, Vex replied, confused. You've been running supplies to the outer colonies for years. Not that home, Taemin said, sealing the cargo bay doors. The real one. That night, Taemin's ship left the station. Security footage showed him calmly running through pre-flight checks, just like any other day. But when traffic control tried to contact him after he reached the system's edge, there was no response. His ship's signature simply vanished from all sensors. The same thing was happening across human space. On Earth, in the colonial worlds, on space stations and trading posts, humans were quietly packing up and leaving. They didn't announce their departures. They didn't file flight plans. They just went. Dr. Ji-Won Yang had been working at the Vorthon Medical Research Center for 8 years. She was known for her quiet dedication and her strange habit of working late into the night on projects no one else understood. Her Vorthon colleagues thought she was just another obsessive human scientist. On her last day, she left her lab clean and organized. Her research notes were sealed in encrypted files that would self-delete in 72 hours. The only thing she left behind was a small potted plant on her desk with a note. Water twice a week. It will be important later. The Vorthons threw the plant away. They would regret that decision within 6 months. Nari Choi was the chief engineer on Kepler Station. For 12 years, she had maintained the station's complex systems with a dedication that impressed even the usually arrogant Zilani supervisors. Her maintenance schedule seemed simple enough. Routine checks, regular replacements, standard procedures that any competent engineer could follow. On her final shift, she walked through the station one last time, checking systems and making small adjustments. To anyone watching, it looked like normal maintenance work, but Nari knew exactly what she was doing. She was setting up a countdown. The station's alien administrators didn't realize that Nari's simple maintenance routines were actually the only thing keeping 47 different critical systems from failing. Her work schedules weren't just suggestions. They were precise calculations designed to prevent cascading failures that could destroy the entire station. After she left, they promoted Klix, a young Zilani engineer, to replace her. Klix was confident he could handle the job. After all, how hard could it be to follow a maintenance schedule? Dong-Hyun Lee ran a small shipping company that handled cargo runs between 3 star systems. His operation seemed unremarkable. A few ships, a handful of routes, nothing that would catch the council's attention. What they didn't know was that Dong-Hyun's shipping routes were carefully designed to prevent conflicts between the Hector Mining Guild and the Kresh Trading Consortium. For years, these two groups had been on the edge of war over mining rights and shipping lanes. Dong-Hyun's company operated in the spaces between their territories, carrying messages, delivering supplies, and serving as neutral ground for informal negotiations. His captains were trained diplomats as much as cargo haulers. When Dong-Hyun received word that it was time to leave, he felt a pang of sadness. He knew what would happen once his ships stopped running their routes. The careful balance he had maintained for so long would collapse within weeks. Subin Park was Earth's diplomatic attaché to the Council, a junior position that mostly involved filing reports and scheduling meetings. The other species barely noticed her. She was just another human clerk, shuffling papers and staying out of important conversations. What they didn't know was that Subin had been Earth's real intelligence officer for the past 5 years. Every report she filed, every meeting she scheduled, every casual conversation she had was part of a massive intelligence gathering operation. She knew more about the true state of galactic politics than most council members. On her last day at the council station, Subin activated a delayed transmission system she had been building for months. In 72 hours, every major communication network in council space would receive the same message. It would be short, simple, and devastating. As humans disappeared from across the galaxy, the alien species barely noticed. If anything, they felt relieved. No more human complaints about trade restrictions. No more requests for representation. No more chaos from the primitive species that couldn't even achieve planetary unity. The Galactic Council held an emergency session 3 days after the last human ship vanished from tracking systems. The session lasted 15 minutes. They congratulated themselves on finally achieving galactic harmony and returned to their usual business. None of them realized they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The countdown had begun. 6 months after the last human ship disappeared from known space, Klix was having the worst day of his engineering career. The young Zilani stood in the main engineering bay of Kepler Station, staring at a cascade of system failures that made no sense. "This is impossible," he muttered, his 4 arms dancing across multiple control panels at once. "The maintenance schedule says these systems should be running perfectly." He had followed Nari Choi's procedures exactly. Every routine, check. Every scheduled replacement, every diagnostic test had been completed on time. Yet somehow the station's power grid was fluctuating wildly. The atmospheric processors were running at dangerous levels, and the gravity generators were creating random dead zones throughout the station. What Klix didn't understand was that Nari's maintenance schedule was like a complex dance. Each action was timed to interact with dozens of other systems in ways that weren't obvious from the technical manuals. She had spent 12 years learning how the station's various alien technologies worked together, creating a web of dependencies that kept everything stable. Without her intuitive understanding of these connections, following the schedule was like trying to conduct an orchestra by reading sheet music without understanding music. The notes were all correct, but the symphony was falling apart. "Sir," came a nervous voice behind him. "We're getting reports of structural stress in sections 7 through 12. The support beams are vibrating at a frequency that's making the inhabitants sick." Clicks felt his confidence crumble. How had the human engineer made this look so easy? Meanwhile, in the Hector system, Commander Thox was dealing with his own crisis. The massive insectoid alien stood on the bridge of his mining vessel, watching 3 Kresh ships move into disputed territory. "Sir, should we engage?" asked his weapons officer. Thox hesitated. 6 months ago, this situation would have been handled through back-channel communications. A quiet message would have been sent through Dong Hyun Lee's shipping network. Arrangements would have been made, and both sides would have found a way to avoid direct conflict. But Dong Hyun's company had vanished along with all the other humans. The neutral ground where Hector and Kresh representatives could meet safely no longer existed. Without that option, every territorial dispute escalated directly to military confrontation. "Prepare for battle," Thox ordered reluctantly. He had hoped to avoid this, but the Kresh had been pushing boundaries for months. Someone had to draw a line. The first shots were fired 3 hours later. Within a week, what should have been a minor territorial dispute had escalated into a system-wide conflict that would claim thousands of lives. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Kelleth was racing against time. The Vorthan medical officer had discovered something terrifying in the latest health reports from the outer colonies. "This doesn't make sense," he told his research team. "The Krulon plague was completely eradicated 15 years ago. How are we seeing new cases?" His assistant, a young Vorthan named Zelith, pulled up historical medical records. According to these files, the plague was contained through a combination of quarantine procedures and preventive treatments developed by Dr. Jiwon Yang. "The human researcher?" Kelleth asked. "I thought her work was just theoretical." "Apparently not," Zelith replied, his blue skin turning pale. "These records show that she was administering preventive treatments to over 2 million Vorthans in the outer colonies. The treatments were so subtle that most patients didn't even know they were receiving them." Kelleth stared at the data in horror. "You mean she was the only thing standing between us and a full pandemic outbreak?" "Yes, sir. And according to these files, the preventive effects wear off after approximately 6 months without booster treatments. The plague that Dr. Jiwon Yang had been secretly preventing was already spreading. 3 colony worlds had reported outbreaks in the past week. Without her knowledge of the specific treatment protocols, the Vorthan medical establishment was helpless to stop it." Back on Kepler Station, Station Administrator Vix was calling his 3rd emergency meeting of the month. The Zalani bureaucrat looked exhausted as he addressed the senior staff. "I need solutions, people," he said, his normally perfect composure cracking. "We've had 17 major system failures in the past 6 months. Our efficiency ratings have dropped by 60%. The Council is threatening to shut us down." Chief of Security Nex, a hulking Brack warrior, spoke up. "Sir, I've been reviewing the personnel files. The human engineer Nari Choi was involved in designing the modifications to 90% of our critical systems. Her maintenance protocols weren't just following standard procedures. They were custom solutions for hybrid technology that shouldn't have worked together in the first place." "What are you saying?" Vix asked. "I'm saying she was holding this place together through sheer genius," Nex replied. "We've been running on autopilot since she left, but the autopilot is failing." Engineering Officer Clicks nodded miserably. "I've been trying to contact other engineers who might understand her systems, but every human expert has vanished. It's like they coordinated their departure to leave us with maximum chaos." What they didn't know was that humans had indeed coordinated their departure, but not to cause chaos. They had tried for decades to train their alien colleagues, to share their knowledge, to build redundancy into critical systems. But the aliens had always assumed they could figure things out on their own when the time came. The time had come, and they were failing. On the diplomatic front, Ambassador Krall of the Aikao's Krath Empire was growing increasingly frustrated. The massive militaristic species had spent centuries trying to expand their territory, but they had always been held back by the need to maintain some level of diplomatic relations with other species. Ye-Jin Lim had been their unlikely liaison for that diplomacy. The small human trader had somehow earned the respect of Krath warriors through her direct negotiating style and her willingness to deal with species that others feared. She had served as an unofficial ambassador, finding peaceful solutions to conflicts that could have escalated into galactic wars. Without her, the Krath had no diplomatic outlet for their natural aggression. Every border dispute, every trade disagreement, every territorial claim was now being resolved through military force. "Why should we negotiate?" Krall asked his advisors. "No one else wants to deal with us anyway. The humans were the only ones who treated us as equals rather than monsters." And so the Krath began expanding aggressively, taking systems that they might have negotiated for just months earlier. Other species, lacking the human diplomatic networks that had previously contained such conflicts, found themselves forced into military responses. Dr. Junho Park's disappearance had caused its own set of problems on the frontier worlds. The human doctor had run a small clinic that served multiple species in the border regions. His patients had thought he was just a general practitioner, treating common ailments and injuries. What they hadn't realized was that Junho had been carefully managing a complex ecosystem of biological interactions. Different alien species carried bacteria and viruses that were harmless to them but potentially deadly to other species. Junho had developed a series of subtle treatments and preventive measures that allowed multiple species to coexist safely in the same environments. Without his intervention, the frontier worlds were experiencing their first multi-species pandemic in over a century. Diseases that had been dormant for generations were suddenly spreading rapidly through mixed populations. As reports of system failures, conflicts, and outbreaks flooded into the Galactic Council, a few of the more intelligent members began to notice a pattern. "All of these problems seem to be connected to the human departure," observed Counselor Yeth, a thoughtful Akrurian diplomat. "Coincidence?" scoffed the Vorthon representative. "Humans were barely involved in galactic affairs. They were too primitive to have any real impact on our systems." But Yeth wasn't convinced. He began quietly investigating the connections between human activities and the current crisis. What he discovered would shake his faith in everything the Council believed about humanity. The cracks were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and they were just the beginning. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy was burning. General Vok of the Thexian Defense Force stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching enemy ships pour through the Kepler Gate. What had started as a minor border dispute 6 months ago had escalated into a full-scale war involving 4 different species. "Sir, we're detecting Kresh battlecruisers joining the Hector fleet," his tactical officer reported. "This makes no sense. The Kresh and Hector have been enemies for centuries." Vok gritted his teeth. Nothing made sense anymore. Traditional alliances were crumbling, old enemies were joining forces, and conflicts were erupting in places that had been peaceful for generations. What he didn't know was that a human named Woo-Jin Kim had been preventing exactly this kind of chaos for the past 15 years. Woo-Jin had run what appeared to be a small mercenary company, taking contracts that seemed random and unimportant. A security job here, a transport mission there, occasionally mediating disputes between rival factions. But Woo-Jin's contracts were never random. Each mission was carefully chosen to prevent specific conflicts from escalating. His mercenaries would arrive at just the right moment to defuse a tense situation, or they would provide security for secret negotiations between enemy factions, or they would simply be present as neutral observers when their mere presence would prevent violence. His company had been operating in 14 different sectors, quietly maintaining a balance that kept regional conflicts from spreading. With Woo-Jin gone, that balance had collapsed in a matter of months. "Sir," the tactical officer continued, "we're receiving a transmission from the Hector commander. He's demanding that we surrender all mining rights in the Vega system." The Vega system is 3 sectors away from Hector space, Vok replied in disbelief. Why would they even want it? The answer was simple. Because they could take it. Without the complex web of agreements, deterrents, and diplomatic channels that humans had maintained, military strength was becoming the only currency that mattered in galactic politics. On the other side of the galaxy, Administrator Zelk was dealing with his own crisis. The Zilani bureaucrat was responsible for managing food distribution across the Council's core worlds, a job that had been routine for decades until now. Sir, we've lost contact with 7 agricultural worlds in the past month, his aide reported. The Krath Empire has claimed them as part of their expansion. Zelk felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Those worlds provided food for over 50 billion citizens across 12 different species. What about alternative supply routes? That's the problem, sir. All our backup suppliers were coordinated through human trading networks. Without those networks, we don't have any way to negotiate with alternative sources. The truth was even worse than Zelk realized. A human named Yejin Lim hadn't just been a trader dealing with the Krath Empire. She had been the architect of an incredibly complex supply chain that kept hostile species economically dependent on peaceful trade rather than military conquest. By providing the Krath with essential goods they couldn't produce themselves, Yejin had given them incentives to maintain diplomatic relations with other species. By connecting different worlds through trade networks, she had created economic bonds that made war too expensive to consider. With her gone, the Krath had no reason to maintain peaceful relations. They were taking what they needed by force, and the economic networks that had sustained galactic civilization for decades were collapsing. Sir, the aide continued nervously, there's something else. We've detected massive population movements from the Outer Rim worlds. Entire colonies are evacuating. The evacuations were happening because of Dr. Jun-Ho Park's disappearance. The human doctor's small frontier clinic had been treating patients from 7 different species, but his work had gone far beyond simple medical care. Jun-Ho had been secretly managing a biological disaster that could have wiped out entire worlds. Different alien species carried pathogens that were harmless to their own kind, but deadly to others. For decades, the only thing preventing cross-species pandemics had been Jun-Ho's careful monitoring and treatment of mixed populations. Without his expertise, diseases that had been dormant for generations were spreading rapidly through the frontier colonies. Entire worlds were becoming uninhabitable as multiple species fled from biological contamination they couldn't understand or control. Counselor Yeth, the Akrurian diplomat who had first noticed the connection between human departure and galactic chaos, was now leading a desperate investigation. His research team had been working around the clock for months, trying to understand how humanity's seemingly minor presence had been so crucial to galactic stability. Show me the mining crisis report, Yeth ordered his assistant. The holographic display showed a complex web of connections spanning dozens of star systems. Red indicators marked mining operations that had shut down due to conflicts, supply routes that had been disrupted by wars, and entire sectors that had become economically unstable. Now overlay the human activity map, Yeth said quietly. As the second layer appeared, the connections became clear. Every stable trade route, every peaceful border, every successful multi-species cooperation project had involved humans in some capacity. They hadn't been the leaders or the decision-makers, but they had been the connective tissue that held everything together. By the void, whispered his assistant. They were everywhere, and we never noticed. Yeth replied grimly. We saw them as primitive because they couldn't achieve planetary unity, but they were holding the entire galaxy together. The worst revelation came when they discovered what had happened to the Vorthon plague containment system. Dr. Ji-Won Yang's research notes, encrypted and scheduled for deletion, had finally been cracked by a team of the galaxy's best codebreakers. What they found was terrifying. She wasn't just treating the Krulon plague, the lead researcher reported to Yeth. According to these files, she was monitoring and preventing 17 different potential pandemic outbreaks across 43 worlds. 17? Yeth asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, sir. And without her monitoring systems, we have no way to detect or prevent the spread of these diseases. Some of them have incubation periods of several years. We might not even know we're in the middle of a pandemic until it's too late to stop it. The cascading failures were accelerating. What had started as isolated problems were now combining into a galactic catastrophe. Wars were disrupting trade routes. Economic collapse was causing resource shortages, and disease outbreaks were forcing mass evacuations that created refugee crises in stable systems. On Kepler Station, Administrator Vix was preparing for evacuation. The station's systems had failed beyond any hope of repair, and the engineering teams had declared it unsafe for habitation. 30 years, Vix said to his aide as they watched the evacuation shuttles launch. This station operated successfully for 30 years. How did it all fall apart so quickly? His aide, who had been studying Nari Choi's personnel file, had a theory. Sir, I think the human engineer wasn't just maintaining our systems. I think she was continuously redesigning them. These technical manuals we've been following were probably outdated the day she wrote them. It was true. Nari had spent 12 years not just maintaining Kepler Station, but constantly improving it. Every system upgrade, every efficiency modification, every safety enhancement had been implemented so gradually that no one had noticed the station was being completely rebuilt around them. Her maintenance schedules weren't just procedures to follow. They were ongoing engineering projects that required constant innovation and adaptation. Without her creative problem-solving, the station had become a collection of incompatible technologies held together by increasingly fragile patches. As Kepler Station powered down for the final time, its failure sent shockwaves through the remaining human installations across the galaxy. Other stations and colonies that had been built using similar hybrid technologies began experiencing their own cascade failures. The domino effect was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. And the worst part was that most of the galaxy still didn't understand what was happening. They thought they were experiencing a series of unrelated crises. They didn't realize they were watching the collapse of a civilization that had been secretly dependent on a species they had always considered inferior. In the emergency session of the Galactic Council, Speaker Vorth called for order as representatives, shouted accusations and demands across the Great Chamber. We need military intervention in the Krath expansion, demanded the Hector representative. We need medical assistance for the plague outbreaks, called the Vorthan delegate. We need economic support for the collapsing trade networks, pleaded the Zilani administrator. Speaker Vorth raised all four arms for silence. The Council will address each crisis in turn. We have the resources and expertise to handle these temporary setbacks. But Councillor Yeth stood up slowly, his expression grim. With respect, Speaker Vorth, these are not temporary setbacks. These are systemic failures, and I don't think we have the resources to fix them. Explain yourself, Councillor, Vorth demanded. Yeth activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy-wide crisis in all its interconnected complexity. Every problem we're facing can be traced back to the human departure. 2 years after humanity's disappearance, the Galactic Council was finally ready to admit they had made a mistake. Not publicly, of course, but in the private chambers where real decisions were made, the truth was impossible to ignore. We need them back, Speaker Vorth said quietly to the Emergency Council of senior members. The galaxy is collapsing without them. Councillor Yeth nodded grimly. His investigation into humanity's role in galactic stability had revealed the true scope of the disaster. The question is, where did they go? And more importantly, how do we convince them to return? First, we find them, declared Admiral Krex. the Council's military commander. "I'm authorizing the largest search operation in galactic history. Every available ship, every sensor array, every intelligence network will be dedicated to finding humanity." The search began with the obvious places. Earth was the first target, but when the Council's fastest ships reached the Sol system, they found empty cities and silent installations. The planet was intact but completely abandoned, as if 10 billion people had simply vanished overnight. Captain Zorith, a veteran Akrurian explorer, led the team investigating Earth's major cities. "This is impossible," she reported back to the fleet. "There are no signs of violence, no evidence of mass evacuation, no indication of where they went. It's like they just decided to stop existing." What Zorith found instead were messages, hidden, in public places, carved into monuments, written on walls in languages that required translation. All of them said essentially the same thing. "We tried to work with you. You made your choice. We're making ours." The messages were signed by Subin Park, humanity's last diplomatic representative to the Council, but Earth provided few other clues. The humans had been thorough in removing traces of their advanced technology. What remained were only the basic systems that other species already understood, and even those were slowly failing without proper maintenance. The real breakthrough came when the search teams investigated the Outer Rim territories where humans had maintained their most advanced installations. Captain Hae-Won Kim had been the last human ship captain to file an official flight plan, and her route provided the only concrete lead. Her ship, the New Horizon, was heading toward the Galactic Rim, reported Commander Thex, who was leading the investigation. But here's where it gets strange. Her flight plan shows a destination that doesn't exist on any star charts. "What do you mean?" asked Admiral Krex. "I mean she filed coordinates that point to empty space beyond the galactic edge. No stars, no planets, nothing that should have been able to support a ship of that size." The search fleet followed Hae-Won's route to its listed destination, expecting to find debris or some sign of what had happened to her ship. Instead, they found something that challenged everything they thought they knew about space travel. "Admiral," came the excited voice of the fleet's chief science officer, "we're detecting massive gravitational anomalies in this region. It's like space itself has been modified. The anomalies formed a pattern that suggested the use of technology far beyond anything in the Council's databases. Space had been warped in ways that created corridors leading away from the galaxy itself, but the technology required for such modifications was incomprehensible." "Could the humans have developed this?" Admiral Krex asked. "Impossible," replied his science officer. "This level of space manipulation would require understanding of physics that we haven't even theorized yet. It would take thousands of years to develop." But Counselor Yeth, who had been studying human activities more closely than anyone else, had a different theory. What if they didn't develop it? What if they found it? This led to the second major investigation, human archaeological activities. A scholar named Jae-Sung Park had been leading excavations at ancient ruins across the galaxy, sites that predated any known civilization. His work had seemed academic and harmless, the kind of historical research that aliens generally ignored. But when the Council's investigators examined Jae-Sung's research sites, they found evidence of technology that was clearly not human in origin. The ruins contained what appeared to be transportation systems, massive installations that could manipulate space-time in ways that modern science couldn't explain. "These ruins are at least 50,000 years old," reported Dr. Velth, the Council's chief archaeologist. "But the technology preserved here is more advanced than anything we have today." Jae-Sung's research notes, recovered from abandoned human facilities, told an incredible story. For decades, he had been mapping a network of ancient installations that spanned the entire galaxy. The ruins weren't random archaeological sites. They were components of a vast transportation system built by a civilization that had vanished long before any current species had achieved spaceflight. According to these notes, Dr. Velth continued, the human researcher believed these installations could be reactivated. He was working on something he called Project Gateway, an attempt to restore the ancient transportation network. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just stumbled upon advanced technology, they had spent generations studying it, understanding it, and ultimately mastering it well enough to use it for their exodus. But that raised an even more disturbing question. If humans had access to such advanced technology, what else had they been capable of? How much of their apparent primitiveness had been an act? The answer came from an unexpected source. Min Seo Lee had operated a research facility on the edge of human space, conducting what other species assumed were basic scientific experiments. When Council investigators finally gained access to her abandoned laboratory, they discovered that she had been working on Project Exodus for over a decade. Her encrypted files, once finally decoded, revealed the true scope of human preparation for their departure. Project Exodus wasn't a hasty evacuation plan. It was a comprehensive strategy that had been in development for 30 years. She was building gateway technology, reported the Council's top scientists after reviewing Min Seo's research. But, more than that, she was planning the logistics of moving entire populations across intergalactic distances. The files showed detailed plans for establishing new colonies in distant galaxies, complete with terraforming schedules, resource allocation charts, and population distribution models. Humanity hadn't just left the galaxy. They had been preparing to rebuild their entire civilization somewhere else. How long were they planning this? Admiral Krex asked in amazement. According to these timestamps, the earliest files date back 32 years, came the reply. That's 2 years before humanity first applied for Council membership. The revelation hit the Council like a physical blow. Humanity had never intended to stay in the galaxy permanently. From their very first contact with galactic civilization, they had been planning their departure. Everything they had done, their diplomatic efforts, their integration into galactic systems, their careful maintenance of stability, had been part of a long-term strategy to prepare for Exodus. They were never trying to become part of our civilization, Counselor Yeth realized. They were trying to fix it before they left. This led to the most painful discovery of all. Hidden in the deepest levels of Min Seo's encrypted files was a detailed analysis of galactic civilization's fundamental weaknesses. The report, written in clinical scientific language, laid out exactly why the galaxy would collapse without human intervention. Humanity had understood the galaxy's dependencies better than the galaxy understood itself. They had seen the coming collapse decades in advance and had tried to prevent it through diplomatic channels and quiet intervention. When those efforts failed, they had simply decided to leave before the disaster struck. They tried to save us, Yeth said quietly as he read through the report. For 30 years, they tried to warn us about what would happen. We ignored them. The search operation continued for months, following every possible lead, but the pattern was always the same. Humans had methodically removed themselves from every system they had been integrated into, leaving behind only the minimum necessary to prevent immediate catastrophe. They had bought the galaxy time to adapt, but not enough time. The systems they had maintained were failing one by one, and without their knowledge of how to repair them, each failure accelerated the overall collapse. We need to find their new location, Admiral Krex declared. We need to contact them and ask them to return. But Counselor Yeth shook his head sadly. Admiral, I don't think they want to be found. And honestly, after reading these files, I'm not sure I blame them. The truth was becoming clear. Humanity had never abandoned the galaxy, out of spite or anger. They had left because they had realized that galactic civilization was fundamentally unsustainable, and that their efforts to reform it from within were futile. They had made a calculated decision to build something better elsewhere, rather than waste more time trying to fix a system that refused to acknowledge its own problems. The search would continue, but it was becoming increasingly clear that finding humanity was only the first challenge. The real question was whether the galaxy could offer them anything that would make returning worthwhile. And based on the current state of galactic civilization, that seemed increasingly unlikely. As Admiral Krex stood on the bridge of his flagship, 3 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Counselor Yeth stood in what had once been the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, but the majestic hall now felt like a mausoleum. Half the seats were empty, their representatives, either dead from the ongoing wars or unable to travel due to the collapse of interstellar transportation networks. "Order! Order!" Speaker Vorth called weakly, but his voice carried little authority. The Vorthon looked aged beyond his years, his blue skin pale and marked with stress lines that hadn't been there when the humans left. "There is no order left to maintain," declared Ambassador Krall of the Krath Empire. The massive warrior gestured, with one of his 4 arms toward the nearly empty chamber. "Look around you. This council is dying." It was true. The Galactic Council, which had governed known space for over 1,000 years, was collapsing under the weight of crises it couldn't solve. The careful balance of power that had maintained peace between dozens of species had completely broken down. The Krath Empire now controlled nearly 30% of former Council space, having conquered system after system in their aggressive expansion. With Yejin Lim's diplomatic channels gone, there was no way to negotiate with them. They took what they wanted and left devastation in their wake. "The plague situation is getting worse," reported Dr. Kelleth, one of the few surviving Vorthon medical officers. "We now have confirmed outbreaks of 7 different diseases across 43 worlds. Without Dr. Jiwan Yang's treatment protocols, we can't even slow the spread. The medical crisis had become a galactic catastrophe. Species that had coexisted peacefully for generations were now biologically incompatible. Mixed species worlds had become death traps where alien diseases jumped between populations with devastating results." "What about the economic reports?" Yeth asked, though he dreaded the answer. Administrator Zelk stood slowly, his Zilani features drawn with exhaustion. "Trade networks have collapsed by 85%. Food distribution is failing across the core worlds. We estimate that over 2 billion beings will face starvation within the next 6 months. The economic collapse was perhaps the most visible sign of humanity's importance. Every major trade route, every stable commercial relationship, every successful multi-species economic partnership had involved human intermediaries. Without them, the complex web of galactic commerce had simply fallen apart. And the infrastructure failures?" Yeth continued. Chief Engineer Klix, who had somehow survived the destruction of Kepler Station, delivered the most devastating report of all. 17 major installations have been abandoned due to system failures. We simply don't understand how the humans made incompatible technologies work together. Every time we try to repair their systems, we make things worse. The infrastructure crisis went far beyond Kepler Station. Across the galaxy, space stations, planetary facilities, and transportation networks that had been maintained by human engineers were failing one by one. The aliens had always assumed they could figure out the technology when necessary, but they were learning that human engineering was far more sophisticated than they had realized. But perhaps the most damaging discovery had come from Insu Kim's personal files. The quiet human observer who had attended council sessions for decades had been keeping detailed records of every decision, every policy change, every political shift that occurred in galactic government. His reports, recovered from Earth's abandoned diplomatic archives, painted a picture of systematic dysfunction that no one had wanted to acknowledge. "Listen to this," Yeth said, reading from Insu's final report. "The Council's decision-making process is fundamentally flawed. Critical issues are ignored until they become crises, and crises are addressed with short-term solutions that create bigger problems later. Without constant intervention to maintain stability, this system will collapse within 5 years of any major disruption. "He wrote that 4 years ago," Speaker Vorth observed quietly. "Yes," Yeth replied. "He predicted everything that's happening now. And he tried to warn us." Insu's reports documented decades of human efforts to reform the councils, processes, improve communication between species, and address underlying problems before they became catastrophic. Every suggestion had been ignored or dismissed as human interference in alien affairs. The humans had seen the collapse coming and had tried desperately to prevent it. When their warnings were ignored, they had simply decided to save themselves. "There's more," Yeth continued. "We found records of a restaurant on this very station. It was run by a human named Soo-Jin Lee." Several of the remaining council members nodded. They remembered the small establishment where representatives from different species would gather for informal meals and conversations. According to these files, that restaurant wasn't just a business. Soo-Jin was mediating hundreds of minor disputes every year. Representatives would come to her with problems they couldn't discuss in formal sessions, and she would help them find solutions before those problems escalated into major conflicts. The revelation was stunning. What everyone had assumed was just a convenient place to eat had actually been the council's most effective diplomatic tool. Soo-Jin Lee had been preventing wars by serving food and listening to complaints. She was more successful at conflict resolution than our entire diplomatic corps, Yeth said sadly. And we never even noticed. But the most incredible discovery had come from the analysis of human art and culture. Kyung-Min Park had been a minor artist, whose work was displayed in various public spaces throughout council facilities. His paintings and sculptures had been considered pleasant decorations, nothing more. But when alien researchers finally analyzed his artwork in detail, they discovered that Kyung-Min had been encoding critical information into seemingly decorative patterns. His art wasn't just beautiful, it was a backup manual for maintaining galactic civilization. "Every piece contains detailed technical specifications," reported Dr. Velth, the council's chief archaeologist. "This painting here shows the correct maintenance sequence for atmospheric processors. This sculpture contains the formula for preventing cross-species biological contamination." His entire gallery is essentially an encyclopedia of how to keep our civilization running. The humans had tried to preserve their knowledge even as they prepared to leave. They had hidden instructions for maintaining stability in plain sight, disguised as art that aliens would preserve but not understand. They were still trying to help us, even at the end, Yeth realized. The full scope of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization was finally becoming clear, but the knowledge came too late. The galaxy was already too far gone to save. The Medi Vorthan Empire had collapsed into warring city-states as the plague outbreaks made large-scale government impossible. The Hektar Mining Guild was fighting a desperate war against Krath expansion while dealing with their own internal conflicts. The Zelani Consortium had dissolved as trade networks failed and economic partnerships crumbled. Dozens of smaller species faced extinction as the systems that had protected them disappeared. Without human intervention, the strong were consuming the weak in a pattern of conquest that would continue until nothing remained but the most aggressive species. "We have to find them," Speaker Vorth said desperately. "We have to convince them to come back." But Admiral Krex, who had been leading the search operation for over a year, shook his head. "Sir, I don't think they want to be found. And honestly, I'm not sure they should come back." "What do you mean?" Vorth demanded. "Sir, we treated them like primitives for decades. We ignored their warnings, dismissed their contributions, and made it clear that we considered them inferior. Even if we could find them, why would they want to return to that?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. The council had finally realized how much they needed humanity, but they had given humans every reason to want nothing to do with them. "More importantly," Admiral Krex continued, "what could we offer them? We're a dying civilization. Our government is collapsing, our infrastructure is failing, and our economy is in ruins. They've probably built something better wherever they went. Counselor Yeth nodded slowly. According to the files we recovered, they were planning to establish a new federation of free worlds, a civilization based on genuine cooperation between species, rather than the hierarchical system we maintained here. A system where humans wouldn't be treated as second-class citizens, Admiral Krex added pointedly. The implications were clear. Humanity hadn't just left the galaxy. They had left to build the kind of civilization that the Galactic Council had always refused to become. They had created what they had tried to reform here, a society based on equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. They learned from our mistakes, Yeth said quietly. They took the best parts of galactic civilization and left behind the parts that didn't work. As the emergency session continued, reports kept arriving from across the galaxy. Each one told the same story. Systems failing, conflicts escalating, civilizations collapsing. The galaxy that had existed for thousands of years was dying, and there was no way to save it. Maybe that's for the best, Admiral Krex said finally. Maybe some. Things are too broken to fix. Maybe it's time to start over. Speaker Vorth looked around the nearly empty chamber one last time. 5 years after humanity's exodus, the galaxy had settled into a grim new reality. Most of the grand civilizations that had once dominated known space were gone, replaced by smaller, struggling communities trying to survive in the ruins of what had been. Counselor Yeth, now one of the few remaining members of what was once the mighty Galactic Council, sat alone in a small observation room on New Haven Station. The station was a fraction of the size of the old Council headquarters, housing refugees from a dozen different species who had banded together out of necessity rather than choice. He was reviewing daily reports when the communication console suddenly activated. This was unusual. Most of the galaxy's communication networks had failed years ago, and the few that remained were used only for emergency broadcasts. "Sir," came the excited voice of the station's communications officer. "We're receiving a transmission from beyond the galactic rim. The signal is incredibly strong, and it's being broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously." Yeth's heart began to race. Could it be? After 5 years of silence, was humanity finally making contact? "Put it through to all stations," he ordered, "and record everything." The transmission began with a clear, steady voice speaking in perfect galactic standard. But it was obviously human. There was something in the accent, the rhythm of speech, that was unmistakably from Earth. "To the surviving civilizations of the Milky Way galaxy," the voice began, "this is Bo-Ram Kim, speaking on behalf of the new Federation of Free Worlds." Yeth recognized the name immediately. Bo-Ram was the daughter of Hyun-Woo Kim, the last human, ambassador to the Galactic Council. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old when humanity left. Now she sounded like a confident young woman, speaking with authority that suggested she held an important position in whatever civilization humanity had built. 5 years ago, our people left your galaxy after decades of attempting to work within your systems. We offered partnership and were given subordination. We offered cooperation and were met with dismissal. We offered warnings about systemic problems and were told to mind our own affairs. The words were delivered without anger or bitterness. Just a calm statement of fact that somehow made them more powerful than any emotional accusation could have been. "We want you to understand that we did not leave out of spite or anger. We left because we realized that your civilization, as it existed, was fundamentally incompatible with our values. You valued hierarchy over cooperation, tradition over innovation, and power over justice." Yeth winced at the accuracy of the assessment. Everything Bo-Ram was saying was true, and the last 5 years had proven it beyond any doubt. "We spent 30 years trying to reform your systems from within," Bo-Ram continued. "Our diplomats argued for inclusion and equality. Our engineers built bridges between incompatible technologies. Our doctors prevented pandemics. Our traders maintained economic stability. Our mediators prevented wars. Each statement hit like a physical blow. The Council now understood exactly how much humanity had been doing behind the scenes, but hearing it laid out so clearly still hurt. You dismissed these contributions as minor because you never understood their scope. You saw individual humans performing specific tasks, but you never realized that we were working together as a single species to maintain the stability of your entire civilization. That was the truth that hurt most. Humanity's contributions hadn't been random acts of kindness or individual excellence. They had been part of a coordinated effort to keep galactic civilization functioning despite its fundamental flaws. When we realized that reform was impossible, we made a difficult decision. We could have continued to serve as the invisible foundation of your society, preventing collapse while receiving no credit or respect for our efforts. Instead, we chose to leave and build something better. The transmission paused, and when Bo-Ram's voice resumed, there was a note of pride that was impossible to miss. We have succeeded beyond our greatest hopes. The new Federation of Free Worlds now includes not only humanity, but 17 other species who have chosen to join us. We have built a civilization based on genuine cooperation, where every species is valued for its unique contributions and every voice is heard in our decisions. 17 other species. Humanity hadn't just left the galaxy. They had convinced other civilizations to join them in building something new. Yeth wondered which species had been wise enough to recognize humanity's true worth and follow them to a better future. Our worlds are prosperous and peaceful. Our science advances through collaboration rather than competition. Our conflicts are resolved through dialogue rather than warfare. We have achieved what your Galactic Council claimed to represent, but never actually delivered. Bo-Ram's next words sent a chill through every listening station in the galaxy. We are aware of the collapse that followed our departure. We know about the wars, the plagues, the economic failures, and the infrastructure breakdowns. We mourn the lives that have been lost, but we do not accept responsibility for your choices. It was a harsh truth, but a fair one. Humanity had tried to prevent the collapse. They had spent decades warning about the problems that would arise. The galaxy had chosen to ignore those warnings. We offered you stability through cooperation. You chose control through hierarchy. We offered you prosperity through mutual aid. You chose scarcity through competition. We offered you peace through understanding. You chose conflict through superiority. The indictment was complete and undeniable. Every choice the Galactic Council had made for centuries had been the wrong one, and humanity had tried to show them a better way. However, Bo-Ram continued, and Yeth found himself leaning forward hopefully, we have not forgotten that many individuals within your civilizations tried to work with us. We remember those who showed us respect and cooperation. We honor those who died in the chaos that followed our departure. There was a warmth in her voice that suggested this wasn't just diplomatic language. Humanity genuinely cared about the beings they had left behind, even though those beings had failed them. Therefore, we extend this offer to any who would accept it. Join us. The words rang through the galaxy like a bell, reaching every surviving station, every struggling colony, every desperate refugee camp. We are transmitting the coordinates to a gateway station that we have constructed in the void between galaxies. Any ship that approaches this station with a crew representing genuine cooperation between species will be welcomed. You will be evaluated not by your past failures, but by your willingness to embrace our principles of equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. Yeth felt his hands shaking as he recorded the coordinates that followed. Humanity was offering a second chance, but only to those who had learned from their mistakes. The gateway will activate only for ships carrying mixed crews working together in harmony. We will not accept refugees who seek to recreate the old systems that failed. We will only welcome those who are committed to building something better, HFY was a test, Yeth realized. Humanity wasn't just offering sanctuary, they were offering membership in a better civilization, but only to those who could prove they deserved it. This transmission will repeat every 5 years as a reminder of what you chose to lose and what you might still choose to gain. We hope that some of you will find the wisdom to join us, but we will not wait forever. The message was nearing its end, but Bo-Ram had one final statement that would echo through what remained of galactic civilization. To those who still believe that cooperation is weakness, that hierarchy is natural, that some species are superior to others, remain in your dying galaxy. You have chosen your path. To those who are ready to learn, to grow, to build a civilization based on respect for all sapient life, we are waiting for you. The void between galaxies is vast, but not as vast as the possibility of what we can build together. This is Bo-Ram Kim of the New Federation of Free Worlds signing off. The choice is yours. The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. Yeth sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had just heard. Humanity hadn't just survived their exodus, they had thrived. They had built the kind of civilization that the Galactic Council had only pretended to be, and they were offering membership to anyone wise enough to deserve it. Within hours of the transmission, ships began moving toward the coordinates Bo-Ram had provided. Not many. The galaxy didn't have many ships left that were capable of intergalactic travel, but those that remained were being crewed by the survivors who had learned the hardest lesson in galactic history. Some species were superior to others, but not in the way the galaxy had always believed. Humanity's superiority had come from their willingness to cooperate, to serve others, to build bridges instead of walls. Now they were offering to teach those lessons to anyone humble enough to learn them. The dying galaxy watched as the first mixed-species crews departed for the void between galaxies, carrying with them the hope that it wasn't too late to become worthy of humanity's respect. In the vast darkness between the stars, a gateway waited. And beyond that gateway, a civilization that had learned to do what the Galactic Council never could. Make the word cooperation mean something more than mere survival. The choice was indeed theirs.